Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Speaking from a stage or from behind a microphone. Two skills, similar yet different. Two skills you might want to master if you want to promote your business, pass along information, or encourage people to listen to a podcast like this one. Our guest in this episode is an individual who has spent many years honing those skills and now teaches them. He coaches those wanting to become more effective in front of an audience, whether that audience be live or on the other side of a podcast mic. Here is our conversation with Carl Richards. Carl, welcome to the podcast.
Dave, it's an honor to be on the show. I'm thrilled you asked me to be here.
Well, I want to thank you for participating. And on the program today, I want to focus on two passions that I think you have. And let's start with this. In this digital online age, how important is the ability to communicate from a stage in front of a live in-person audience?
Oh, my goodness. That's a very good question. I know the answer to that question. I thought these questions would be harder. But no, I think in this digital age, Dave, it's still extremely important. Yes, I know that we're in this space now where a lot of what we've done in the past is now online. You know, the podcasts are more popular than they ever were, online summits, virtual events, but having the ability to know and not just know the stage, and I think you know what I mean when I say that, but know how to use that piece of real estate to your advantage every single time you're on it, right? And know how to bring your audience along on the journey. I don't want to say it's a dying art, but it's a skill that as we've shifted into this digital place, I think a lot of people are disconnecting from that because we're just jumping on Zoom calls and that's where it seems to be going. But that is extremely important. Even if you don't do it all the time, it's extremely important for making that connection. And I think when we're on a physical stage, we make a connection that is when you're trained or when you're taught how to do it correctly, you can be so successful in that space. You can bring the audience along on any journey when you know how to do that. And that's where a lot of the magic happens. And some of that magic gets watered down in the digital space, but certainly on that physical stage, oh my goodness, I missed it for 3 years. Geez, I wonder why. But certainly love the fact that you can still, in that space, on that stage, that is a very valuable piece of real estate. People can make money. People can change attitudes, change lives, change their own lives, the lives of others. There's so much magic there.
Let's focus on business people for a second. I know that you and I have probably sat in an audience and watched someone up at the front of the room talking to us. And you're cringing in your seats because you have a sense, I think both of us have taken some form of effective speaking course. You have a sense that they're not doing it correctly. They're reading from a script, or they are putting up a slideshow and they are reading verbatim what's on the slideshow. Those sorts of things. Now, the whole business of whether you call it professional speaking or public speaking or effective speaking, whatever you want to call it, why is it so important to you?
Why is that space so important to me? Oh my goodness. By the way, you're right about the reading from the slides. I remember being at a financial services event. Oh, this is going back 10, 15 years. And one of the speakers, and this is one of the higher income earners in the company, gets up and literally their whole presentation is one slide after another. And they're literally looking at text, reading verbatim. Drives me absolutely insane. Why is this space important to me? That's a very good question. I think this is a deeper question. I think it's important on the surface because I know, and this is part of training, this is part of doing research and information. And I know that the ability to double your revenue in business comes when you're getting on the stage and that can be a physical stage, by the way, or that can be at the front of the room in a networking setting. So when I say stage, I don't mean you have to talk on a stage in front of 50,000 people. For some, that would be very intimidating, but I know the value of that. And you can increase your business by 50% just by speaking about what it is that you do. Let me take it a little bit deeper, though, because I know for me personally, I used to stutter when I was a kid. Every second or third word, well, as a matter of fact, I would barely get out 3 words before I would stammer and stutter. So I was terrified to speak. And when you have that terror inside of you, the last thing you want to do is speak. Well, everything that we do in the world is based on 2 things: communication and sales. And I hated that word sales, but communication and sales. If you can't communicate with people, you're never going to make a sale. And I don't mean sales just as in the sense of let's buy something and sell something. I mean sales as in, you're a really good salesperson when you can convince somebody to live with you for the rest of your life, right? You're really good at sales, and that's in that sense. But I mean the sales as in really connecting with somebody with your ideas and bringing them into your camp, all of those things. And if you can't speak, if you can't communicate, you can't do any of that. So for years I couldn't, and it really pains me when I see people get into that space where the ability to speak either comes naturally, or they've worked at it, they've taken some training, they're confident to the point of being almost cocky, where they don't care about what comes out of their mouth when they're at the front of the room. They don't care that they have boring PowerPoint slides. They don't care if they just wing it. And it just, so that's why I get so passionate about it, because it's such a, again, it goes back to it being a very valuable piece of real estate, but also value to, we're all pressed for time, right? So if you can give us something of value, I don't care if you're going to hold my attention for 20 minutes or 2 hours, but if you hold my attention for 20 minutes and you have nothing to say, you've wasted my time, right? So that's why I think it's so important. And as I said, going back to my own journey and story, that's why I think it's so important, because of that story of having stuttered.
I think one of the things that people don't realize too is that if you are in front of an audience and you know that you have important information to present to them, and you are not presenting it in a fashion that attracts the audience, keeps the audience, then the audience is looking at you and saying, I don't care what you're saying. I am influenced by how you're presenting it, and so I'm ignoring everything you're saying.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's one of the reasons why when I'm in that setting, and I do this in the digital space, and it really, I think, shocks people when I do this. On the physical stage, I'll do this too, but in the digital space, I won't use PowerPoint or any kind of slides. I will if I need to, but if I don't need to, I'll use a flip chart, because I know I can engage you and I can be focused on speaking to you and not hiding behind my presentation. If I'm hiding behind my presentation, I think that waters down my value if I'm not communicating clearly. And there's that disconnect as well. I don't know about you, Dave, but quite often when I see a slideshow come up, when I'm on a Zoom call, I tune out. I'll turn off my camera even. I'll go to the bathroom. I'll go grab another coffee, because if you're going to disengage yourself by saying, here's my presentation, and think that that's what's important. No, the most important thing is you. And that engagement that you mentioned, Dave, is huge. So, and I know it seems like I'm picking on PowerPoint, but we've gotten into this place where it's like, oh, I'm giving a presentation, I have to put together a slideshow, a slide deck. No, you don't. Especially if you're only speaking for 10, 15 minutes in front of an audience. If you're speaking for an hour, yeah, okay, you might need something to support your presentation, but you don't really need to have all these slides. And we think it makes us look professional, and we think we're engaging when what we're really doing is disconnecting. Yeah. And I think it's true in the digital space, but I think it's also true in the live space. And as we get back to being live and in person again, we really need to consider that the connection doesn't come from technology. The connection doesn't come from a flip chart. The connection comes from the message that you're sharing. So the words, the way in which you're framing your questions or engaging the audience. Quite often when I'm speaking, Dave, and you've probably seen speakers that do this, is I'll stop every so often and I'll ask a question that makes the audience think. I'll say something like, has that ever happened to you? Or have you ever thought that maybe this is something? So it's a question that really gets them to think. And if you make people think and bring them along on the journey and not just entertain them or think you're entertaining them, you'll rock the platform every time.
Let's talk a little bit about people who want to prepare themselves, get themselves trained so that they can make a presentation that is more impactful. Now, over the years, there have been various programs that have been put out there to help people with effective speaking. One of them is Dale Carnegie. Mm-hmm. One of them is a program that was instituted by the Junior Chamber, commonly known as the JCs, who had an effective speaking course that has been conducted in Kingston, I know, several times in a long time ago. Toastmasters is one that I think is still around, but I don't know about the others. Now, from the perspective of the sorts of things that these programs put out there, what is it that they are going to be training an individual to learn?
That's a very good question. They're all very different. I'm not familiar with the JC's one. I'm somewhat familiar with the Carnegie Institute and some of their trainings, though I've never taken their trainings. I do know that they focus a lot on the theory behind presenting as opposed to the getting on stage and actually doing it. And some of their training, and this is not to poo-poo them or anything, but some of the training is also very archaic. It hasn't really advanced, in my opinion, very much. But a lot of people still think of it because Dale Carnegie, of course, was a very well-known thought leader, wrote numerous books about how to win friends and influence people, was probably one of his most popular ones. But there's a lot of skill set that I think is very important. And Toastmasters is probably one that gets it right in the most important thing isn't the theory behind speaking, it's the stage time. But I think that all of these programs, what they offer, if I can be so bold as to say, what they offer is the surface answer to what you're looking for. So if you're looking to gain more confidence, I'm assuming that Dale Carnegie and Toastmasters will help you do that. And again, not sure about the JCs, but I know that Dale Carnegie and Toastmasters will help you do that. Will they help you in structuring a presentation that you might give at a meeting? Or if you're giving a speech at a wedding, will they give you those tools to help you do all of that? Will they, I know Toastmasters, for example, even had different programs back then, and I can't remember the name of the program now or how the program has evolved now that they're mostly in the digital space. But Toastmasters, then they had a series of manuals, and those manuals, advanced manuals, could teach you anything from how to deliver a toast to how to give a 20-minute presentation. But the one thing that I don't think any of these groups do is they take the public speaking aspect to the professional speaking level. And that's where you need to almost hire a seasoned speaker trainer or coach to help you in that space. I attune it to the difference between you want to, just as a hobby or just because you and some friends want to go and maybe play some intramural sports or fun league type things, you might do some things that will help you with that. But if you want to really up your A game in the sporting world, if you want to go from playing just basic sport level, you want to play in the Olympics, for example, you need a coach. You need to be able to play at that level. And none of these programs offer that. They can't. They just don't have the capacity to do that. There are people that come from those organizations that expand and start their trainings and offer it. But I'll almost guarantee you all of those individuals that come from, be it Dale Carnegie, be it Toastmasters, and maybe even JCs, that they've taken advanced training as well in another organization that focuses on all aspects of professional speaking, including not just speaking on the stage, but How do you move individuals from listening to you to going to the back of the room and signing up for your program or buying your book or whatever it is? None of those programs, and again, don't know about JC's, but the other two programs I mentioned, they don't have what it takes to do that. They're great at getting you on the stage, sharing some theories behind speaking, helping you build confidence, conducting yourself with more authority in a meeting. But when it comes to actually being a professional speaker, a thought leader, and even advancing into, if your aspiration is to be a guru like a Tony Robbins, that's not going to happen if you're just laying your hat in one of those speaker organizations. And there are others as well that play that game. There are speaker competitions that play that game, but they don't get you to that pro level.
When you talk about professional speakers, can we differentiate between those individuals who are taking training to be able to communicate the value of their business or their products versus those people who want to get up and speak at a conference? Like, for instance, I know that you do some of that. When you get up and speak, are you just promoting what you do as a business, or are you speaking on different topics, or what's the market for somebody who considers themselves to be a professional speaker?
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity here to differentiate between a keynote speaker and a person who is a business owner and speaks about their business. And there's a difference. So a keynote speaker has a message and they travel the country or all over the world speaking on that one message. And maybe once a year they write a book, and that's the message that they're going to go and speak about all over the world, right? And they're probably a member of a speaking organization, be it the National Speakers Association, the NSA in the States, or CAPS in Canada, the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. They're probably a member of an organization like that, which allows them to play at that higher level. A business owner who speaks about what it is that they do, they can still be a keynoter, but they're more likely to be a signature talk presenter. So they're going to probably have 2 or 3 topics they can talk on. They're probably similar in nature and related to their business. So I quite often will speak about podcasting, and I have 2 or 3 different talks I can give about podcasting, why podcasting is the place to be, why it's the new era of marketing. I can talk on those topics, and I focus on that. And the goal is to bring people either into my programs, my services, events I might be having. So it's not just a message. It's not just oh, that was a great keynote and clap, 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 and oh, buy my book afterwards. It's more about, no, I want to share this message with you to empower you to take the next step. And I think that when we differentiate that, that really makes it more clear as to the 2 different lanes that people tend to choose. And keynote speakers or those soapbox speakers, they're becoming fewer and fewer, because as more people come into this space as business owners who want to speak and get their message out, be it on a physical stage, be it in a podcast, they're focused more on their products and services as opposed to here's an overall inspirational message.
At some particular point, you decided to get into radio, as I did. You said, okay, well, I'm doing some speaking and I'm doing some podcast training, but I'm also bringing home the bread and butter by working in radio. The decision to leave radio and move into the focus on podcasting, which is our next topic, but the decision to leave radio, why did you do that?
Yeah, that was a tough decision, but I think the pandemic helped in deciding that for me. It was a very precarious time, as we all know, and the broadcast industry has been through many different, it's taken many punches throughout the years, especially radio, when radio went from being the medium everyone listened to, people used to sit around the radio, and then television came out and everyone thought when TV came out, oh, radio's dead. No, radio evolved into being this top 40, the Alan Freed era of, oh, it's rock and roll, it's top 40 music and all that other programming that evolved from that, and a very formatted type show. And then in the the late 70s, early 80s, automation started to come into play, and a lot of people, oh, radio's dead. And then something like a global pandemic hits, right? And as you know, Dave, and I'm sure that everyone listening knows, that a lot of the revenue from radio comes from ads. And when revenue drops by 70%, something has to give, right? Even for these larger companies that support the radio world, at some point, it's time to start to look at headcount and start to make some changes. And that's what happened. And it was an opportunity for me to, because I'd already had a part-time business doing speaker training while still bread and butter radio, right? It was an opportunity to pivot my business to full-time. And because of the need that people were, everyone was shifting, a lot of coaches and consultants were shifting their business now to be virtual. That was the opportunity to help people get on virtual stages, and podcasting just made sense. So that was the transition. So, and it was, I don't know about you, but they say you haven't made it in radio until you've lost a job. Well, I lost my first radio job in 2010, to which I went, yeah, I made it. And then I lost another one in 2020, but I didn't feel it as a loss. I felt it as a gain, because now I can pivot and do something that is going to bring me as much joy, if not more, than I had when I was working in radio. But it was really the pandemic that forced that shift. Mm-hmm. And I would not, there's no looking back.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about podcasting. This is something that you are heavily involved in. You are a trainer. You work with a lot of different people who do podcasts. Mm-hmm. And even though this is a podcast that we are doing right now, I still feel that there are people who don't really understand what a podcast is, and mm-hmm. how much the medium has expanded in recent years. I don't know if you have any stats on how many podcasts there are in Canada or the US, or is that something that you have at the tip of your tongue?
Yeah, I don't have the immediate stats for Canada or the US, but globally there are about 5 million podcasts worldwide. Of those 5 million, though, interesting to note, this is one of the unfortunate things about the podcasting industry. If there's one thing that's unfortunate, there is a lot of pod fade. And by pod fade, I mean, people come to this space, they're all excited, they start a podcast, and it's mostly individuals who have started podcasts maybe 10, 15 years ago. They'll do a couple of episodes. They've realized how much work it is, and commitment and dedication to doing a show every week or even every other week, and they give up, they quit. So because of that, about 40% of the podcasts that are still listed in directories or in the different stats, they come up with the stats, they're not active. And they're not active because when you go to your podcast app, be it Apple, be it Spotify, especially Apple, because the actual term podcast was an Apple invention, so to speak. When you look at the stats, or when you look at some of those shows, some of them haven't had fresh content in 10 years, mm-hmm. but they still show up. So what does that mean? It means that it's still a great area for somebody who's looking at this space with fresh eyes. It's still a place for them to explore, but it takes commitment and dedication. And it also takes a little bit of training, of strategy to think, how am I going to maintain this show? How am I going to keep it going? You have to think about not just the short-term game. Podcasting is a long game. And if you're looking at it, your show is very different. It's very much a community-based, story-based show. A lot of podcasts, though, coming into the forefront now are all about business, which is fine. But you need to think about what's your long game here. What's your goal? And I think that for those 5 million podcasts, now, again, saying that 40% of them are done, so those 3 million podcasts, need to think about how it's impacting the world, right? And we've seen a shift in recent months to the fact that Edison Research just posted not too long ago that on-demand content has surpassed streaming content. So that means on-demand podcasting has passed radio. And we've seen that in the television world with more options for being able to watch things when you want, right? Be it Netflix, be it Prime, be it, Disney, whatever it is. We've seen that. We're seeing it now in the radio world, and we're seeing a shift in revenue as well. Whereas there's a lot of ad dollars being put into podcasting, and the latest number I have is for, and I know that obviously this podcast will live forever, but at the recording of this, fall of 2023, in the first quarter of 2023, ad revenue from podcasting in the US alone was $2 billion. Broadcast radio was $1.7 billion. So we're seeing that shift. So we're seeing that trend towards this space more and more.
Let me take it back a step and look at it from a listener's perspective.
Sure.
What's a podcast? Something very basic.
Good question. Good question. A podcast is an RSS feed. Let me make it simpler than that. But no, seriously, it's actually true. That's where the whole thing began. It began with somebody getting really smart and saying, wait a minute, an RSS feed, that can be used for text. Well, why can't it be used for audio? And that's where it started back around 2000, I believe, is where it started. But basically, a podcast started out as an audio message that can be shared across multiple platforms. And those platforms, of course, are the Apples, the Spotifys, the Google Podcasts. There are several others as well. What's different about podcast versus, say, radio is it's very niche. There are podcasts out there that are about anything. But let's say, Dave, what really entertains you is you love sports and you love comedy, and you're driving, which means you can't watch a video, but you want to listen to something that's sports related, or you want to listen to something that's comedy related. Well, guess what? Comedy and sports, those are two of the top formats in the podcasting space. So there's something there for you to listen to. As opposed to radio, which has a pre-programmed, for example, if you're a country station, you're going to play country music. Totally makes sense. But you might be a country station that plays classic country music. Totally makes sense. And a lot of our radio stations now are music-based. There's not a lot of information-based radio like there used to be. All right. And you know that this is a very viable space because a lot of radio stations, guess what? They're leveraging the podcast platform as well by having that on-demand content. But that's what a podcast is, though, is you can listen anytime. There's no appointment tuning. In other words, you don't have to set your clock for lunchtime to go and listen to a podcast. You can be making breakfast. You can be morning run. You can be driving, whatever it is, and listen to something that is of interest to you. And the average podcast listener, by the way, has about 7 or 8 shows that they engage in on a regular basis. And they can range, again, some of the top formats are sports, comedy, true crime, believe it or not. Business is one, but also society and culture has become another leader in the podcasting space as far as popularity, because I think we have this curiosity about society and about what's happening in other cultures.
If you compare it to streaming on your favorite TV network, or not network, but streaming service, you have a situation where you can turn on the television, you can pick a particular program, and if it's a TV series, you can binge watch a whole bunch of shows. And so if, from the listener's perspective, if I'm sitting in front of my television and I'm starting to watch Monk, for instance, as a TV show, I can start it whenever I want. I can pause it whenever I want, and I can stop it, or I can just let it go and watch as many as I want to. So if for the listener who has never listened to a podcast, it's the same thing, except it's audio only. There's no visual component, although there are video podcasts. But the point is, this is a lot different from radio in that you can tune into whatever you want to listen to anytime, anywhere, stop, start. And that's the major difference between radio and podcasting. When you look at the people who are in the medium now, you mentioned that comedy and sports were two of the more popular genres of podcasting. The people getting into it, how much, for instance, would you say would be allocated to those wanting to educate with a podcast? Do you have any sense of of that, whether that's becoming like, for instance, universities, other educational institutions who want to be able to provide information to people, and podcasting makes sense as a way to do so.
Yeah, I think there are some educational institutions who are, I'll say, slowly starting to embrace the podcasting space. Some of them are a little bit more fast to get to the space than others. And I think it's partly because universities are so fragmented, because you have multiple programs. So it's not the sense of the university has a podcast. It's this department. So it's the drama department, or it's the engineering department, or it's the school of business department. So you think of it departmentally, and even doing a deeper dive, because I've done some work here in Kingston with Queens on a couple of podcast projects, and it's usually a particular program or project within a program that becomes a podcast. So it gets a little bit more complicated versus, say, a business owner who comes into this space. Even if you're a large business owner, you run a large corporation, maybe not as large as, say, some of the big banks or big telcos or something like that, but you're coming into the space with a, $2, $3, $4 million business, and you have some employees, and you want to expand your expertise. That maybe you should write a book. You should probably be doing some more speaking. A podcast is a great way to be able to do that and really connect with your audience, who's probably going to be listening to you, or if you are doing a video podcast, they're going to be connecting with you at their leisure or at a time when they can, right? So to say, I'm going to be speaking at this event in Dallas, Texas. Well, Dave, if you're not going to Dallas, Texas, guess what? You're not going to hear me speak, but you can hear me speak to you every week on a podcast, and that helps to raise my credibility. But I think learning institutions are still trying to figure out how to effectively use the podcast. And by the way, it's the same as municipalities. Some municipalities are really good at embracing the space, and others are still sort of slow to get there, to figure out what's the best way to utilize a podcast to our advantage to connect with more of our audience. And as audiences shift, meaning that with a lot of younger people being the core demographic for podcasts, and when I say younger, I mean as young as 12. There are podcasts out there for people as young as 12, but I'd say 18 to 54, as that audience embraces more of the podcasting space, it's just a greater opportunity for businesses, municipalities, and institutions as the podcasts world evolves, for them to get into the space.
Among your many passions, teaching people how to set up a podcast, how to do one effectively, is something that you do for a living. When you are talking to someone who wants to get into the business of doing a podcast, and let's say it's to promote their business,
Sure.
What's the first step from their perspective? What should they be doing to get started? So you're the teacher now.
Yeah, absolutely. There are two things I believe that you should do right from the start. Number one is, if you haven't listened to podcasts, listen to podcasts. I think that people in business sometimes will get the idea. Maybe it's from a colleague, maybe it's from a coach that says, oh, you're at the point in your business where you should start a podcast. And you go, okay, I'm going to do that. You really need to know what the podcasting space is like. You need to know what your competitors are doing in this space, not so that you can worry about what they're doing, but so you know how you can best position yourself. But if you don't even know what a podcast sounds like or what a podcast can be, how do you move on to the next step, right? So the first thing is listen to podcasts. The second thing is understand that there is no, it sounds like the Wild West when I'm going to say this, there are no rules. And we're not a bunch of outlaws in this space, by the way, but there are so many rules that define broadcasting or print or magazines or books. But in the podcast world, not only is there such a wide array of content, but there's a wide array of how you can deliver that content. You can do solo episodes. You can do, Dave, like you and I are doing. You can interview people and have conversations with them. You can have, I know people who will use a podcast platform. They'll use their podcast not only to interview guests and have guests come on, but they'll use it to offer a 6-week program, and they'll have some of the elements in their podcast, and they'll encourage their participants to do that. So there are many different ways to come at this, but the bigger answer to this is you need to know your why. So you need to listen to podcasts, and you need to know, why is it you want to start this podcast? And what's the goal? And if you don't know that, you'll struggle. And that's where I think some of the pod fake comes in, because you want to just give up. But I think if you know, hey, there are podcasts out there, some of my competitors are out there, why do I want this show? What goal do I want to get from it? What's the result that I want? That will help you in setting up your content, the structure, and it'll also help you in knowing how to engage your audience.
If the most listened to genres of podcasts are, say, sports and comedy, just to follow up on our discussion,
sure.
If I'm a business owner and I'm thinking of the listener who may have sort of a general overview of podcasting in general, I am looking at podcasts as a way to entertain. So if I'm the listener, I'm looking for entertainment. I'm looking for not necessarily information, but I'm looking for things that I may not know too much about. How do you transition from people considering podcasts to be entertainment to being a mechanism for you to sell them your product?
Yeah, and again, I think now we're talking about a content question. Yeah. So I think when there's multiple different kinds of content, right? So the kind of content that we're talking about today, we're having a conversation. This is not a hard-hitting conversation. It's not a political podcast. It's not comedy, although we've had a couple of laughs along the way. but it's again, when you're talking about, shifting it and really wanting people to take action, I believe if you're leveraging your podcast for business, you need to know where you're going with that content. It's a roadmap, right? It's almost like, if I can give an example, and we sort of alluded to this earlier, when you're giving a presentation on a stage, you just don't stand up there and speak for the sake of being heard. You speak with a purpose. Whether you're a keynote speaker or whether you're a workshop presenter or you're delivering a signature talk or a signature workshop even, you still have a purpose. So you need to provide the audience with that end goal, or that CTA, that call to action. And the call to action could be, thanks for listening to this episode. By the way, pick up the copy of my free ebook, or the PDF has more information in it. It's connecting them to your website. It's connecting them to find out more about you. But the bigger thing is, it's about building community. Because then I think that's one of the things that gets watered down is we want to build our listenership. We want to get all that stuff out there, but we forget that, wait a minute, my audience is basically a community. Why don't I build that community? Because the bigger you build your community, the easier it is to connect with them and bring them into your space and bring them into your business. But you really need to, I probably touched on a few things there that you want to back up on.
I want to go back and talk about two things before we run out of time here. One of them is the technology side of getting into podcasting. So if somebody's sitting there listening and thinking, well, I have a topic, I have an approach I'd like to use to put together a podcast, what am I looking at in terms of money to spend to get going?
At least $100,000. I'm kidding. And I think this is one of the misconceptions, though, because when we start to explore podcasting in a little bit more depth, especially if we are going to YouTube, which is basically, by the way, a behemoth of a directory of video content. That's essentially what YouTube is, right? And yes, there's some non-video content there too. But we look at these people sitting in these studios that look like they spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on microphones and switches and mixing boards and cables and equipment and a producer and a this and a that. And all of a sudden it sounds like you're starting your own radio station. It doesn't have to be that way. When you're starting out, start out with a good quality microphone. You can spend a couple $100, even less than that, on a good quality microphone. And then, you want to make sure you have computer, obviously, that's a very valuable piece. You need that. Avoid using your phone. As good as a phone is, it's still not, especially if you're leveraging this for business. I share this with people. If you're doing it as a hobby, and you want to use some of the apps on your phone that have been designed to create a podcast, okay, fine. But if you're leveling up your credibility and you're saying, I spend zero money on my podcast, that's like saying your business isn't worth the money that you're spending, right? If I said that correctly, I think I did. So the technology doesn't have to be a lot of money, but you need to understand for quality, and audio quality, by the way, is crucial. Video quality you can fix with a little bit of wipes, or you can do cameras angles back and forth. But if it's horrible audio, although AI is proving me wrong as it evolves, it's harder to fix poor audio. And without audio, there is no video. Right? So really focus on, if you have a good microphone, $150, $200, that's decent. You can spend more. That's really the most important thing. But the other thing is, if tech is an issue, there's a reason why I don't fix my own car, Dave. And you know why? Because I can't. And if I did, my spouse would say, what are you doing? If I'm lifting the hood, right? So that's why it's important to get advice from somebody who knows what they're doing.
So I've bought the equipment and I've got the idea and I start doing the podcast. How do I promote my podcast, given the fact that there are how many million out there? 2 million? 3 million? 4 or 5?
3 to 5 million, yeah.
How do you promote a podcast?
Good question. There are
I'm taking notes here.
Are you taking notes? Okay, you're like, how do I promote my podcast? And again, for business, all right, if we're thinking at it from a business perspective, you're going to leverage your email list. Your email list is probably one of the most effective ways to promote your podcast. Email marketing, even though sometimes we think, it sounds kind of skeezy, I don't know if I want to do it, because we get those 11 billion emails a day from that one thing we signed up for, and we're like, I wish it would just stop, and you unsubscribe, and somehow they still manage to cut through the filter. That's not what I mean. I mean email marketing that is effective, and you're really wanting to share with people on your list about your podcast, your episode, the person you talk to, whatever it is. So it's part of a larger marketing strategy, but part of that marketing strategy, not just your email list, but think about social media. What social media channels are you likely to engage your prospects and clients with? Now, Dave, I know this is a hobby for you, so your engagement might be a little bit different. You might promote it solely on Facebook because maybe that's a platform that you use, or you're going to promote it more on Instagram. But leveraging the social media platforms that you use on a regular basis, you don't have to go out and get a TikTok account if you don't already have one. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to market, but your email list, social media. And I think one of the biggest ones that we forget is, once you have that podcast, open your mouth and tell people you have a podcast. Quite often what happens, Dave, I found when we've worked with clients, we'll spend all this time, we'll spend 2 or 3 months together creating a show. And then what we'll get is, I have a podcast. You should listen to it. It's like it's whispers. You don't hear or see anything. And it should be, if you're leveraging it for business or even for yourself, Dave, if you're going out there and you're talking to people in the community, you should say, have you heard The Kingstonian? No, what's that? Oh, it's my podcast. Listen to, it's organically letting people know it's out there.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the most effective ways, even in this modern world of promotion, is by opening your mouth and saying, this is what I'm doing.
In 60 seconds or less, where's this all going?
Hey,
podcasting.
I'm a former broadcaster. 60 seconds or less. You got to be kidding me.
I'm timing you.
59, 58. In 60 seconds or less, I still say this is even though podcasts have been around for 20 years, it almost feels like we're just getting started. More people are coming to this platform. People are looking for us online. People are looking for, in the business world, we're looking for social proof. We're looking for professionalism. We're not opening the yellow pages to find a business anymore. We're not looking at posters or flyers that get dropped into our mailbox. We're not going to conferences like we used to. We do attend some, but we're not going to them all the time. So we need to have something, a way to connect with our ideal clients all of the time. So that's where this is heading. And I also think that we're going to see some shifts with artificial intelligence. I don't even want to open that can of worms, but I think we're going to see some changes that are going to make it easier for business owners and existing podcasters who are doing it for entertainment value, or Dave, like this show. We're going to really see some shifts that'll make it easier for us, but we're still going to have to continuously level up our A game, because there's going to be this push towards quality. And I think at some point, just like we saw this with the internet, there's going to be this like minimum standard. Mm-hmm. And I think we're getting close to that. As I said, there's changes in technology, changes in AI. We're getting there, and better to be ahead of the curve than behind it and go, oops, I missed it. So that's where I think we're headed.
This is an industry that is growing by leaps and bounds, and I know you are very excited to be a part of it. For those people listening who want a little more information about you and your business, check out the liner notes to this particular episode. I want to thank you very much today, Carl, for your time, and all the best going forward.
Thanks, Dave. It was a pleasure being on the show.
Carl Richards is a coach and founder of Podcast Solutions Made Simple. His contact info can be accessed in the liner notes to this episode. To those of you who have taken the time to listen to this episode, thank you. Please leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. I'll be back soon with another conversation.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.